response to the recent storms. As you can see from the two charts, there's a number of things that we face and a number of things we have to do. These recent storms have had a real impact. We've got dam spillways eroding, we've got roads crumbling, we have our aging infrastructure and it's maxed out. What's required is to take some immediate action, which we're doing, and then over the longer term, we have to invest billions of dollars in California infrastructure. It used to be called public works, and there's a lot of public work to be done here in California, in fact, throughout the entire country. Let me just start over here with the problem that we're facing. The needs of infrastructure, about 187 billion in unmet needs that we've got to face. That's 50 billion for flood management, flood control management, 59 billion deferred highway maintenance, and then we have 78 billion in local streets and roads. So this is a big number, 200 billion. And I might add to that, if you put in the pension liabilities, state and local, you can add another 200 or 300 billion. So there's real work to be done, and even though there's all sorts of other needs that are also insistent, the basic core of what government's about has to focus, number one, on the basic infrastructure that allows our state to function. Now, over here, we've got there are four main points I want to mention. First of all, we've got to take care of flood control and emergency response. That's a total of 387 billion. We put 50 million right out of the state general fund. And secondly, I want to do require action plans and flood inundation maps. Inundation maps are the ones that describe where the evacuation what it has to include, and the action plans are actually what do you do when you have a problem. Now we have these things, but we've got to expand them. We've got to make them better. Next, we want to expand our existing dam inspection program, which we do inspect all the dams, but the state only owns about 3% of them, and we want to make sure in our annual inspections we take into account more recent scientific modeling and more recent knowledge of geologic hazards. And then finally, I want to seek regulatory relief at the federal level and funding. And to that end, I'm sending a request to the President to streamline the environmental review at the Oroville Dam project, and I'm listing 10 urgent areas that need environmental review. And this is part of the 50 projects that we have asked to be considered for funding in response to an earlier request for proposals out of Washington. So we have the flood control, we have the dams, and those kind of things. And then secondly, we have to deal with the transportation. And in that sense, we also have a deadline or a goal to get our transportation funding plan out of the legislature by April 6th. And that's a tall order, but we're going to do it. So any other questions, any questions at all, I'll be glad to take them.
Governor, given the state's sort of resistance position to the Trump administration, are you concerned that that's going to affect the possibility that we'll get federal money for infrastructure here in California?
Well, you've just stated a fact that there are many policies in Washington that many people in California don't agree with, myself included. However, we are inextricably linked to the federal government. The President and the Congress, although they may be under a different party, we are linked together as part of America. In fact, California is 12%. So we have to, I think, walk a very thoughtful line here, seeking help that we need, but also calling attention to those things we object to, and fighting vigorously when required.
Have you reached out to the President at all to try and mend any fences or anything?
Well, I don't think that's the appropriate move at this point. I'm sending him a letter. I asked for an emergency declaration. He responded. And instead of these more general concepts, I like to take it in very discrete, sequential steps based on the needs of the hour. and we're doing that.
Governor, in the number that you got here of unmet infrastructure needs, could you talk a little bit about how we got to this point? Is that just basically people not doing their job in elected office, or is just how did we get to where we are?
This is the way, John, this is the way the world works. The immediate takes precedence over the more fundamental. And the more fundamental is we have to take care of flood control. We have to make sure our dams are in order. We need the roads, the maintenance to maintain them. We have to improve them. We have to, I believe, have to build an adequate rail system. We have to do the water fix. These are big projects, and anything big today challenges the Lilliputian mind that is still operative in too many political circles. So it doesn't get done because big is often feared, and sometimes big can cause big problems. If you look at Oroville Dam today and you propose that, there'd be a hell of a lot of environmental review. The fact that this was done by my father back in the 60s, it was a different world. So I am pushing against the resistance, and we will continue to do that. But I don't think you can have a great country or a great state unless you invest tens of billions, even hundreds of billions, in the core material substratum of our whole economy.
Could I just then follow up? Could you give us some sense of like how people should view the unmet need as a serious problem, a dangerous problem, a problem we just need to get now and finally buckle down and do? What's the level of concern people should?
Well, the level is serious. So you could even, if you were a conservative, you bring up the pension liability. How serious is that? Well, it's serious, and we got to get at it. But all the other things that are here that you see flowing through the legislature, they feel very urgent to many people too. So it's a matter of balancing priorities. I would say these liabilities are a serious cloud, and we have to take them seriously and do more than chip away at them. We have to make substantial investments. That's why the transportation measure, which requires more revenue, more fees, changing the law to allow local jurisdictions to have more ability to raise the funding they need. Look, we're going to have a civilization. We've got to pay for it, and there's a lot of spending we've been unwilling to. Government is not the most favorite item. People are skeptical. They don't believe things can happen. You people in the media do a great job at pointing out everything that doesn't work, everything that's wrong, and all the foibles, and they're true in many respects. But we have to build enough confidence that we can get the job done. And when the roof is leaking, if you don't fix it, it'll cost more later. So yeah, it's serious, but I wouldn't panic.
So were you blame yourself in any way for neglecting the infrastructure during your first
No,
governor?
not at all. I have you around to chronicle these things. The fact of the matter is, we do need to think the quality of life and the need for renewable energy and protecting the environment and things like that. I focused a lot on that, and this was a time in the 70s where we just had got through this Vietnam War that seemed to be a major catastrophe, real loss of confidence in the best and the brightest. We just had a president had to resign under the threat of impeachment in Watergate. So there's a lot of disbelief in the political process. So I certainly felt that skepticism. I brought it to bear on these projects. So today, with more decades passing, with more unmet needs building up, I think I certainly take a more expansive view when it comes to building and infrastructure. So if you detect a difference in the way I see the world at the age of 78, about to be 79, and 36, about to be 37, yes, there's a big difference, and I would hope so, because I've had a lot of life in between.
Governor, are you satisfied with DWR's management of the dam and the subsequent crisis in handling the spillway problem?
Yes, I have to say that I had this feeling when I was being briefed. This is a world of real engineering, physical, and expert kind of understanding and knowledge. So when a generalist listens, you have to listen with a certain amount of humility, because these are not the normal political conversations that you hear in the hallways of Sacramento. This is stuff about putting rock in the dam and the spillway is split open and shall it go down at 50,000 cubic feet per minute or 100,000. These are quintessentially expert kind of things. And in a democracy, that's always a tension between the general representatives of the people and the scientists and engineers and the experts. So I think, in general, we have a very expert Department of Water Resources. It's one of the best in the country. And will they be perfect? No. Am I perfect? You're not perfect. Look at the failure of the whole news industry. So we all have to kind of deal with the challenges we're dealt. We've got to play the cards that we're dealt. And yeah, you'll probably pick some issues up. And as you do, I'll respond. And
Governor, if they're so expert, why did they reject the idea of armoring the auxiliary spillway
when?
10, 11, 12 years ago? I mean,
Well, for
it was
one
proposed,
thing,
it was pointed out. Why did they reject it?
who was governor then? Was that Davis or Schwarzenegger?
Schwarzenegger.
Schwarzenegger. Well, he had a lot of things in his mind. Here's the point. You folks are very good at finding some obscure document that says, oh, we knew about it. Well, you may know about it, but you got other problems. You wonder, why don't we spend our $187 billion? Well, we have all sorts of immediate issues. Affordable housing, child care, many, many issues. So it's just that in a government as big as this, not everything will be taken care of always. And lucky for you, because you wouldn't have a damn thing to do if we didn't have these kind of problems. So I don't think that's very significant that an environmental group filed something. What about PG&E and their gas pipes? Everywhere you look, and the bridge, and this and that, this is the way, this is what happens. And we try to correct, and we try to do the best way we can. But if we want to guard against any problem 100%, you'd have to quadruple the spending, and that wouldn't make any sense.
Governor, what's been the
President Pro Tem has
What?
proposed a plus $1 billion bond for part of which would go to water. Do we need another bond to start paying for this?
Well, the
$50
trouble with
billion?
bonds are the interest rates are going to go up. They cost you twice as much. Sometimes a bond can be good, and I don't want to say categorically it's not a good idea. But in general, we ought to be doing more pay-as-you-go. You have a problem, is it real? You got to pay for it. What does pay for it mean? You got to raise funding. Politically, we're in a world where opposing government and government spending is very popular. But we still have the fact that the public works are needed. So, yeah, I like the idea of pay-as-you-go. We didn't have any bonds to build roads when my father was governor. We did a hell of a lot. So we didn't put bonds so much, I don't think, in education. So we got to belly up to the bar and start spending money. Now, will the people reject that? In many cases they will, but we've got to keep at it and try to win a constituency to take care of business if we want a great California in the decades to come.
If I may, the congressman from Oroville and a bunch of other Republicans signed a letter urging that President Trump free up federal funding for this. Would this have happened if they had not done that letter?
Say that again?
LaMalfa and other members, Republicans in Congress, signed a letter urging the president to free up emergency funding for Oroville.
Yeah.
Would it have happened if they had not written that letter?
Well, politics is a reaction to striking events. That if we didn't have all this flooding, we wouldn't be here today. This is the way news works, right? It's man bites dog, not the reverse. So events, all the different things that create news. So they're responding, but the real question is not to release emergency funds, but to raise taxes and revenue to have emergency funds. And that's where I think the Congress is going to be very challenged, because it's always easy to borrow. But a bond is ultimately a tax, a deferred tax. So I think we need the proper balance between putting the burden on the next generation and facing up to the fact that we have to take more of our private capital and put it into public spending.
Governor, what's been the response to your request to the federal government?
We just sent it out this morning. So I'll let you know as soon as we get a response. I hope it'll be as fast as the emergency declaration. That was very impressive.
So, Governor, you're working on a plan for the roads that's been going on for a while. What is the plan to find money for the water infrastructure at this point?
Well, we have the proposition. We have the water bond.
You have some money for that, but that's $437 million as opposed to $50 billion that we're talking about over here. how do you get to that? How do you want to get to that bigger number?
You will not get the full answer this morning, because we didn't get here without a lot of factors coming into play. So we listed here because I want to create the context that this is not an isolated set of problems. It's part of a larger picture of a state with 40 million people having to deal with the impacts of a modern civilization. And despite what you hear from many conservatives, there has to be a very healthy public expenditure based on taxes. And that is very unpopular, and usually I would never even use the word taxes were I to be running for office. I'd call them revenues. But you have to face up to it, and it's pretty darn important.
And do you think there should be new taxes to pay for these things involving?
Well, you have to get money. This is not a magic trick here that we just hocus pocus. A lot of politics is hocus pocus because the people don't want to spend the money, and you want to get reelected. You don't want to push it into their face. But somehow we have to bring these urgent needs to public attention. To remember, and I'm going to give you a Jerry Brownism here. If you want to look at how things worked for 20,000 years in California, there were 300,000 people living pretty lightly without cars and power plants and all the rest of the stuff. That worked for 20,000 years. Ours has worked for a relatively brief period. And if we want to make it sustainable for a long period of time, we have to make it more elegant, more efficient, more environmental friendly. And that is going to take a lot of money.
And the last question is, you've asked for the expedited federal environmental review from the administration.
Yes.
Do you also want them to give money for these things? As you
Yes.
mentioned, when you're in how much money, do you have a specific dollar figure in mind for what you want to get from them?
Well, we have, the President Trump has talked about $1 trillion. California probably should get 12% of that. It's $120 billion. If you take it over 10 years, that's $12 billion a year. That would be a good place to arrive. I don't know if we're going to get there, but I'd start there.
Governor, in light of the recent failures that are sort of memorialized behind you and elsewhere, a number of Californians expressed concern that we're spending millions, billions of dollars on high-speed rail as opposed to keeping up the infrastructure that we should have been maintaining. What do you say to that criticism?
Well, I say that you have to be able to do more than one thing at a time. And meeting the needs, whether it's 5 or 10 million more people, and all the cars they're going to have, and all the airplane rides they're going to take, a passenger rail alternative is a very important complement to the roads, the bridges, and the airports. If you try to expand an airport, you'll know how hard it is. Having a certain amount of the traffic go by way of high-speed rail would be very good. In the valley, if some of the people who are trying to find houses in San Jose or Palo Alto could take a ride 50, 90 miles into the Central Valley, they could find a more affordable house. So the high-speed rail is part of the infrastructure. And there's lots of things we have to do. A lot of people don't like the water fix. They'd like to just keep the old earthen levees as our main protection. I'm giving you my best judgment. And also, the high-speed rail was voted on by the people. They put that out, and I decided to follow through on what Schwarzenegger did and what the people voted for. And I think it makes a lot of sense, particularly with climate change and the ability to have a totally electrified system depending upon renewable energy. So it meets a lot of goals. It will be invested in over many years and decades, and I think California can well afford it, and it'll make our state a much better place.
Do you have any sense of whether
What?
President Trump's potential infrastructure spending would include your high-speed rail?
I don't know. I do know that many people, such as I think Mr. McCarthy and others, were for high-speed rail until Obama became president, and then it became an Obama idea. So we're very polarized, red and blue, even here in California, and that becomes a problem. On the natural, a lot of these people would like the high-speed rail, but you have to have something to fight about. If it isn't taxes, it'll be some project that Obama was for. And in a red district, that's popular. But we'll see. Mr. Trump is a very different kind of Republican. We'll see how much money he wants to put into infrastructure. And he said he wants rail. If he wants high-speed rail like 17 other nations, this is the only place he's going to get it while he's president. So I would make that appeal to him. And I know we're going up against a very red tide here of opposition, but we will do our best. And this thing is a long-term project, and one way or the other, I think we can get it. Governor,
What do you think of the
What?
feds cutting off funding or holding up funding for, speaking of rail, electrification of Caltrain from San Jose to San Francisco?
I don't know exactly what that means. I mean, I think it's ready to go. It's an obvious project. If you're not for that, you're really not for infrastructure. That's a no-brainer. It speeds it up. It'll take cars off the road. It reduces the noise. It cleans up the air. It's based on American renewable energy. The only thing you can say for that is it's scoring political points by, politicians that know better and should do better.
Governor, do you think that there is a disconnect between investing in new projects, prioritizing that?
What's that again?
Do you think there's a disconnect between prioritizing investing in new projects as opposed to maintaining existing projects, particularly flood protection for communities?
Well, you have to balance it all off. I mean, you come up with the best mix of what's needed, what's politically doable, what's engineering-wise possible in real time. So it's a trade-off, and we're dealing with a lot. We're a budget of what, 170 billion plus. There's a lot of decisions embedded in that, and you can always see them a little differently. So it's always a trade-off.
Do you think that played a role into what happened in Oroville, and should residents living downstream of other dams across the state be concerned?
Sure, you should be concerned. I mean, you live in a floodplain, and you build these huge earthen structures like that. I mean, yeah, it's not as it's a reality. So we got to do our best to make sure they're protected, and that's what we intend to do. That's why the dam inspection. That's why the evacuation plans. That's why we want to revise the federal rules on how how you operate all these dams, because that protects people. And I have to say, because I've flown over it before, but I flew over it 2 days ago, and what strikes me is how engineered our landscape is. There's so many little dams and channels and spillways. It's highly engineered. It's a very sophisticated task to keep it all going right. With that level of complexity, you could always have failures. So we have to keep at it, keep making it as resilient as possible. So that's what we're stepping up through the actions I announced today, and it will be a continuing challenge. When you have 40 billion people, with all the impact, the cars, the technologies, the energy and the poisons and the pollutants we're putting in the air, that's a lot of impact. And we have to both lower that impact and find elegant ways of living with it if we want to avoid apocalypse and absolute disaster, which is a real possibility.
Are you talking about enhancing the existing dam inspection?
Yes.
Program? Can you give a little
We
more
inspect every
detail?
year. What?
Right. Can you give a little more detail about how that's going to be enhanced?
Well, because there's more, I think we have more improved modeling. We didn't think, I'm told, that not many people were thinking about spillways, appurtenances, I can say that word right, appurtenances to dams. We've got to look at those. They aren't in some of the inspection plans. So now we're giving people a better checklist.
Governor, can you respond to the irony someone pointing out about requesting emergency funding for this flooding we're seeing while the state's having this ongoing drought?
Yeah, that's called the weather. And now we got something more long-term called the climate. And the climate is changing. And I've spent a fair amount of time on this. And with the Mediterranean climate, large parts of California are going to dry out with real impacts that are going to be very difficult to manage and are going to cost tens and tens of billions of dollars going forward. So we still got all these people, mostly in the Republican Party, that say no. All the scientific experts that I've talked to, it's pretty clear to me this climate change is coming. It's coming faster than we thought. The sea level rise is going to be greater. The droughts are going to be more severe. And every time things get warmer, every degree warmer will increase moisture by 10%, which means 8 to 10%, which means you're going to have more storms and more floods. So we're going to get the worst of both. More drought, which means more fires, more impact of vegetation, and on the other hand, you're going to get more floods. So it's going to get more difficult. It's been a nice ride for the last 150 years, but we're going to have to step up and make real investments that we haven't made, and we have to prove, can 40 or 50 million people really inhabit this space without causing, catastrophe.
Governor, you're reaching out.
What?
Are you planning?
I think, why don't we take, you've had 3 there. You're not a daily reporter here, so, yeah. Yes.
Because you have existing dam inspection there as a priority on the board, I'm just wondering if there's anything that the state or the Department of Water Resources is looking at retroactively and saying that maybe we could have taken steps that would have at least prevented the extent of the flooding of some of the issues that we're seeing again in the pictures behind you.
Well, I'll let the Bill Croyle, but I will just say before he answers that, you could have, DWR under Schwarzenegger could have responded to that filing. Now, I have not reviewed that in any depth, but I can just tell you as a simple matter, the risks are almost unlimited. At what level do you cut it off and say, we're not going to do that this time? And we do that all the time. And if we try to button down every risk, it becomes enormously expensive. And one of the reasons why our housing is so expensive is we have so many protective rules, which they don't have in other places, and which we didn't have 10 years ago or 20 years ago. If you look at the state building code, it's massively larger than it was even 10 or 20 years ago. So we're trying to cover every risk, and we're getting very risk averse, but there's a limit and there's a balance to how much you should try to take care of and how much you're willing to take care of.
If I could just follow
So in other words, there will be problems. We will not live a trouble-free existence. Not the state and not you or not me.
If I can follow up, the emergency spillway at the
Yeah.
dam we heard hadn't been used in its existence
Yeah.
in 50-some years.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if it's the state's position or if any review's been done to just look at whether or not it was adequately tested in terms of like what we would we know exactly what it would look like if we had to use that? I don't know if there was an...
I don't know, but we can, this is a good question.
Sure. First of all, I want to back up a little bit to the our Safety of Dams program. We have the best in the nation. We've spent a number of years working at the federal level and really setting the bar on how we inspect and oversee and enforce the state's dams policies. And so having said that, all of the dam system, there's the dam, but there's a lot of moving parts in that dam that make the system perform as designed. The emergency spillway is one of those parts of the system. The flood control structure is how we would use that during the high flow events to remove water from the reservoir, as well as the powerhouse at the base of the dam. All of those parts are integral in the overall function of the dam for multiple benefits: flood control, water supply, power generation, environmental benefits. So the spillway was inspected by not just the department, by third party or by independent contractors once every 5 years, as well as our regulatory agencies, both state and federal. And so looking at the information we have so far, the area related to the emergency spillway was considered in the design back in the 1960s. We've now just learned a whole bunch more. Now we've learned, and we'll learn a lot more as we get into, as we move out of the emergency response phase to this situation, this incident, and more into the recovery. Along with recovery, we have already, from almost day one, a number of different regulatory agencies and third-party consultants looking at everything that's happening. And so we'll learn a lot more about what we knew and what we should know in the future on the emergency spillway. We're really looking forward to having all eyes on this as we take this information and then move that throughout California to ensure our dams and our systems that are associated with those dams are at the highest degree possible to provide that level of protection.
We've got time for one more
Governor
question.
By the way, I just want to...
John, let's get someone who has an answer.
He's the acting director of the Department of Water Resources.
I just think, make sure people know.
Yes. By the way, if you all recall where you were in 1960 in November, some of you weren't here, right? Well, the water bond, I believe, passed by less than 1 percentage point. So getting any of this thing done, that was a bond, not a tax. So that was a revenue, yeah. So it was a general obligation bond. So it's not easy.
Governor,
On another
but
note,
you're reaching out to the federal government at a time when President Trump is looking to enhance deportations. Would you be willing to go into a give and take type of relationship when it comes to immigration, sir?
Well, I think the matter of immigration and the policies coming out of Washington are of grave concern to the people of California and to me personally. So we are announcing what we believe, and we're telegraphing what steps we'll take. And over the next weeks and months, we'll have more to say and more to do, because we face an unprecedented set of changes that will affect real people in our state, and we want to do everything possible to protect them.
We had one more question over here.
just on another note, I was wondering if you're getting ready to declare the drought over, and if you're not, could you explain why?
Well, we are getting ready. Yes, that's a very good, that's true. Yes is the answer. Okay.
Thanks,
But not yet. Not until the end of the rainy season.
All right, thank you.